So let's go back and change the setting to chart history. If we don't change this, then when you run the code, then obviously you will see the errors that the conversation buffer is missing with the input keys of chart history or history. Earlier I faced this kind of errors and I struggled to understand these errors are because of this memory key. It was really great experience to understand these minimal concepts. That's why I documented here. When you are executing example 2, use history, and executing example 3, use chart history. So don't forget that. We have an agent. It's a conversational retrieval chain where it has access to short-term memory and a long-term memory from the vector database. And we comment example 2 and enable example 3. So basically for example 3 we need to do 2 more steps in addition. Like as soon as the conversation, the Langchain or agent returns an answer, we need to save it in our vector database. So this is where we actually store the conversation and retain it in our next session. So that's the only difference that we can see from the conversation chain to the conversation retrieval chain. And apart from that, I do like to explain here the input variables are chart history, context and question. So chart history and context will be taken care by the Langchain itself. They will pass the values while running the agent. So that's why we don't need to take care of those things. We don't need to manage or bother about them. We just need to simply pass the question from whatever user asked. This is the prompt template because we need to inform the conversation travel chain that we need a combination of answers from both chart history and the context. We need to explicitly mention that, otherwise the Langchain won't understand from where it needs to fetch the answer from, and sometimes it may say it doesn't know what we are asking for. That's why we pass the prompt here. The prompt holds this and the input variables and the template here. So that's all it has, nothing much. So let's run this now. We cleared previous cache. So I'll reintroduce myself as hi. It fetched from the actual context. It identified who I am because I have already shared my profile in the documents. It do have context about me from the context. So let me share my new interest now.
To share my interests, going on long drives, trying different foods, and exploring tech. Okay?
Same conversation that we did previously. Let me put this in a question way. So if I make it like a question at the end, the bot is actually responding in a positive way. So that's one observation that we can clearly see here. It said information that I shared in the conversation history, but it was not mentioned earlier in the context. Okay, let me quickly exit now. I will end this session. Let me restart the session so that we can test whether it remembered what are my interests shared in the previous conversation history. I'm directly asking it without asking any other questions so that we can wrap this demonstration. Okay, let me ask, what are my interests? You mentioned earlier that you enjoy going on long rides, trying different food and exploring tech. I'm not aware of any information about Sandeep Kumar's interests. It recalled the conversation, but it didn't map from the document's context, conversation context. That's why it didn't answer here, but it is able to answer what are my interests if I ask. Now I ask what is my name. So we can clearly see now we are able to recollect the previous conversation history using the conversation retrieval chain. Using this we can build like a ChatGPT application which runs on persistent memory to provide conversation history even from long times.